Good afternoon, everyone. I realize we don't have microphones, so I hope that you hear us okay. Feel free to let us know if you'd like us to adjust. Welcome to this session, and I'd like to thank H2H for organizing this session. Hannah here will give you a brief introduction to H2H in just a moment. My name is Anna Eid Nahikian. I'm an independent researcher. I'm affiliated with the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, and I'm also doing my doctoral studies currently on the role of localization and humanitarian negotiation in hard-to-reach areas. So I couldn't be personally more excited to have this conversation. I'll get to our panelists in just one moment, but I'd like to give the floor to Hannah to share a little bit about H2H.
Thank you all for joining, both online and in the room. For those who have not heard about H2H Network, it is a network consistent of 62 different organizations. And what they all have in common is that they provide services to other humanitarian organizations. So they're all enabling a better humanitarian response. So we started after 2016 and are a network that enabling community among these different organizations, but also facilitating more services for the wider humanitarian response. So if you're ever interested in specific specialized expertise niche services, then our network is where to go. So we're also very excited about having this session because supporting other aid organizations is what we are doing. And this is what we're going to talk about today, more particularly in hard to reach areas. So,
Johanna. I'll give you a little bit of an introduction to each of our panelists, and they'll speak in more depth about their work. We have Anna Elisa Badbad, the chair of Insecurity Insights Executive Board and works as a consultant for numerous projects as an expert on protection of healthcare, emergency response, and civil-military relations, and works with the World Health Organization. She's worked for several years in the humanitarian operations in Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East, and was global advisor to the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, on protection of healthcare and health policy. She has an executive master's degree in diplomacy and policymaking, a full residency in primary healthcare, and a clinical license as a psychologist in her country of origin, Brazil. Welcome, Mohammed Abdi Mohammed is Chief of Economy at Tabantabo Development Organization. He is a former primary school teacher in Somalia and a humanitarian worker in hard-to-reach areas. He migrated to Norway in 2012 and transitioned to software engineering and is now working for one of the leading software companies doing accounting and finance solutions in Norway. Mohammed co-founded Tabantabo, a nonprofit organization in his free time. Their work, as he will explain further, is focused on Jubaland and the Galmudug regions of Somalia. And finally, we have Cédric Pirou online. Cédric is program director in Haiti for Handicap International, Humanity and Inclusion since 2022. He knows the country very well since 2000 and has lived there almost continuously since 2010. He has worked for 20 years in international development, then in complex humanitarian operations, including in South Sudan, Central African Republic, and of course, Haiti. And he'll draw a lot of experience from his current work in Haiti. I'd also like to acknowledge Yannick, who is here from H2H, who will be doing translation for Cédric during this conversation. So just to frame a little bit about where we're going today, this panel is intended to explore how we can overcome challenges and risks associated with supporting aid delivery in hard-to-reach areas, and particularly how we can support local organizations in their work. While localizing humanitarian action has progressed in policy discussions and to some extent in practice since particularly the Grand Bargain in 2016, there are still differences on how it is practically implemented, not to mention in what the definitions of localization really are. This is due to factors including finance, of course, allocation of resources to local NGOs by their INGO partners, and transfer of high compliance requirements, but also risk to local partners working particularly in hard to reach areas. And so we know that on one hand, local organizations provide a great deal of contextual knowledge, cultural support to international organizations. They nevertheless are always playing, for the most part, a supporting role in gaining access for INGOs, and don't really have autonomy in terms of strategic, operational, policy decisions, and over the futures of their organizations in a lot of cases. So we'll hear from our panelists today, and we'll be taking questions both from the audience here, so please get your questions ready, and Hannah will be monitoring the chat to see if there are any questions from our online audience. So with that, I'd like to take advantage of my role as moderator and ask the first question, and I'll direct it first to Anna, and ask you sort of what are the unique challenges in your experience that local organizations are facing, and how has your organization been working to support the interplay between INGOs and NGOs?
Thank you. So thank you everyone for joining this discussion. I think I will answer this question from the perspective that first tries to understand what is a hard to reach area. So a hard to reach area is hard to reach for whom? Because there are people living there. So in theory, it's hard to reach for someone wanting to deliver aid there. And then there's a big disbalance when we think of these wanting to deliver aid coming from a big organization who has, as we were just hearing, a lot of resources under them to actually understand the context, manage the options and the resources to get to that place. And a local organization that will likely receive this task, receive this request from this bigger organization, and will then face the actual challenge or the pathway to get to that place. And we're thinking, of course, like just for the sake of the exercise, of a hard to reach area as something that demands some logistical aspect to get there, but also we could think about other barriers, such as, for example, administrative barriers, and then you might choose to have this kind of localization strategy coming from a bigger organization to simply cut off bureaucratic procedures. But then going back to this idea of what are the challenges, for me, the main challenge, and that's where I'm coming from within Security Insights perspective, is to manage this balance that is created between what a big organization has and what a smaller organization has to respond to the operational difficulties, right? And in that sense, I think in Security Insight has focused a lot on sharing information. So, and this sounds like something so obvious, right? Sharing information, but nowadays it's so easy to go online, to go on social media and find out stuff. But what Security Insight does specifically is create consolidated reports so that you actually have an overview of the area in terms of security, in terms of perception of humanitarians and other elements that might help to manage those decisions. And of course, we also share strategies to cope. So what normally big organizations have embedded into their capacity building pathways, that is like training people on a principled approach or training people on basic security approaches. So in Security Insight helps to bring that down into language and resources that are easily accessible within the H2H network and directly for those who access their website and other platforms that are used for dissemination. And then I just wanted to...
Thank you.
Please turn off your microphones if you are in the audience online. Thank you.
And then just to do a small provocation with the fact also that I'm Brazilian, and that in Brazil, for example, we do have a full-fledged approach to delivering health support in the Amazonic region. There we have a very close coordination between the national authorities and actual smaller medical teams that are able to reach very, very, very hard to reach areas. And it's a super complex logistics, but you see like this is another interesting element of these challenges that we were speaking of. You have an immediate coordination mechanism that is not passing through just the traditional humanitarian approaches, but also through the national authorities. So I just wanted to initially flag these two big challenges. One is how we deal with this balance of information, of access to resources, and how we need to spread more what we have in terms of knowledge, in terms of information, so that this balance is not so much concentrated, it's not concentrating so much the resources onto the big organizations. And also this idea that coordination mechanisms can be much more variable than what we traditionally see within the humanitarian sector, that is the normal cluster-based organization. And again, I'm not against that at all. I think it's a fantastic coordination procedure, but the reality shows us that there might be many other happening, and we have to acknowledge and explore them also to facilitate the path forward. But I'll stop here and we can continue.
Thank you very much. What I'd like to do is pose actually the same question to Cédric online, and perhaps giving some context into how the challenges perhaps have evolved in Haiti, because you've been there for so long. How have you seen this transformation in the context, and what kinds of challenges does that pose for local organizations and for your organization in particular in terms of access? So Cédric, I give you the floor. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Anna. Donc, Haïti est un pays confronté depuis plusieurs décennies à une grave crise politique, économique et sociale et sécuritaire. Et depuis 2018, le contexte s'est dégradé. Et on va dire que depuis 2023, on atteint des violences, des niveaux de violence sans précédent dans le pays. Et donc, c'est toute une population qui est confrontée à l'émergence des gangs. Donc, ces groupes criminels organisés contrôlent de plus en plus de territoires, notamment au niveau de la capitale, Port-au-Prince. Aujourd'hui, c'est près de 80 à 90% du territoire de Port-au-Prince qui est sous le contrôle de ces groupes armés. Donc, ils commettent des exactions auprès de la population, assassinats, kidnappings, viols et des massacres répétés. Donc, cette situation entraîne des déplacements très importants. On estime que depuis le début de l'année 2023, il y a eu 360 000 déplacés internes au niveau du pays. Les gangs aujourd'hui attaquent de plus en plus les structures. Yes.
Cédric, sorry to interrupt you. We just like to leave a little space for Yannick to be able to translate what you're saying, if you don't mind, so our audience can understand everything you're telling us. So if you don't mind just taking a little pause between, small bits of information, that would be very helpful. So we'll just pause one moment.
Okay, no problem.
It was explaining that Haiti has been facing for decades of crisis, which are multidimensional in nature, both economic, political, and with security challenges. That projected crisis has worsened since 2018 and even more so since 2023. The population in Haiti is currently facing issues associated with the activity of criminal gangs. Territorial control has significantly increased recently, especially in Port-au-Prince, and their activities has resulted in very diverse types of human rights violations, which themselves triggered mass internal displacement. There have been up to 360,000 IDPs recently.
Yes. Thank you, Cédric.
Juste à titre d'exemple, mais depuis le premier trimestre 2024, il y a eu au moins 2500 personnes qui ont été tuées ou blessées à la suite des violences liées aux gangs. Ce qui fait de ces 3 premiers mois les mois les plus violents que le pays n'ait jamais connus.
The first 3 months of this year have been the 3 most violent that the country has experienced in terms of number of civilians killed by armed.
Par sa localisation géographique, Haïti est en plus fortement soumis aux risques naturels, avec depuis sur une vingtaine d'années, il y a eu plus de 20 chocs majeurs avec des tremblements de terre, des inondations, des sécheresses et bien sûr des ouragans qui participent à affaiblir un peu plus l'économie.
So in addition to political and security issues, the geographical location of Haiti means that the country is exposed to diverse natural disasters. There have been up to 20 major disasters over the past 4 years, including cyclones and earthquakes, and that, of course, weakens the economy and the social structure of the country further.
Donc, dans ce cadre très dégradé au niveau humanitaire, Humanité et Inclusion intervient en tant qu'organisation de solidarité internationale indépendante et impartiale afin d'apporter un soutien auprès des situations de pauvreté et d'exclusion. Et on œuvre principalement auprès des personnes handicapées et des populations les plus vulnérables.
So that's in that context that H2H, so Humanity and Inclusion, is operating as an international NGO to provide support to local communities, in particular the focus on the most vulnerable and persons with disabilities.
Donc, Humanité et Inclusion intervient en Haïti depuis 2008 et dans les domaines de la prévention, de la réadaptation et de la santé. Et également du soutien logistique.
So H2H has been working in IT since 2018 with a focus on health programs as well as logistics.
Donc, depuis 2020, Humanité et Inclusion, à travers son unité Atlas Logistique, a donc développé une plateforme logistique pour le transport de marchandises et de biens humanitaires grâce au cabotage, bateau à voile et au transport routier. Ce service est proposé aux autres organisations humanitaires suivant l'approche H2H et donc permet la livraison de biens essentiels sur l'ensemble du territoire haïtien en essayant d'éviter les principaux axes routiers qui aujourd'hui sont sous le contrôle des gangs.
Okay, so like since 2020, H2H has established a logistical service support called Atlas Logistics that's available to other aid organizations working in IT, whereby Atlas Logistics helps them move their supplies across the country using both sea and road access, but primarily relying on sea access because road access is being blocked or too insecure because of the activities of harm.
Donc, en termes de défis, les principaux défis auxquels nous sommes confrontés en Haïti, le premier, vous l'aurez compris, c'est l'augmentation très importante des besoins humanitaires qui nécessite donc une réponse d'urgence avec aujourd'hui plus de 50% de la population haïtienne qui est en insécurité alimentaire. On a également une reprise des cas de flambée de choléra à travers le pays. Et aujourd'hui, ce sont plus de 21 camps d'IDPs qui sont concentrés dans la capitale, avec de plus en plus de déplacés internes aussi vers les provinces.
So the main challenges that the country faces at the moment is a massive increase in humanitarian needs. About half of the population is food insecure. There's a cholera outbreak. There are up to 20 IDP camps in the capital itself, and displacement waves to more rural provinces.
Par rapport à ces difficultés de réponse humanitaire, le principal défi est lié à l'accès, qui est donc très restreint du fait du contrôle des principales voies d'accès pour sortir de la capitale. Les gangs aujourd'hui instaurent des points de péage et des zones à risque sur l'ensemble des routes départementales et des routes nationales pour sortir de la capitale. De ce fait, ils étouffent complètement la population habitant en capitale. Ils ont également le contrôle de l'aéroport international depuis le début du mois de mars de cette année.
So like the main challenge that the humanitarian actors in Haiti are facing is of course one of access, in particular road access to reach areas outside of the capital is particularly challenging because the roads are being controlled by gangs. They manage checkpoints on different roads, which prevents population to leave as well as humanitarian actors, and they also control the international airport.
Une des conséquences, c'est l'explosion des coûts support et notamment des coûts de transport liés à la logistique dans un environnement de financement des besoins humanitaires qui est très inférieur à ces besoins. À la fin du mois de mars 2024, seulement 8% du Humanitarian Response Plan qui était financé.
So what that means for humanitarian actors that they're facing massive increase in the cost of support costs for transportation for logistics, but that's despite a severe lack of funding, as the HRP is only funded up to 8% at the moment.
Et donc, j'espère que vous voyez l'importance du renfort du transport logistique au niveau d'Haïti. Aujourd'hui, il est également nécessaire de renforcer les acteurs locaux et de renforcer cette coordination entre l'ensemble des acteurs humanitaires, des ONG locales aux ONG internationales, en passant par les agences et les acteurs étatiques, pour servir au mieux la population. Merci.
And just to conclude, that shows why effective coordination between local actors, humanitarian actors, state authorities are important to manage and address those logistical challenges to make sure that supplies can be delivered to and populations which are difficult to reach.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Cédric. Merci, Yannick. Thank you. Mohammed, we turn to you to give a little bit of an overview of your organization and the challenges that you've seen in Somalia in particular.
Okay, thank you. Let me start to say that I'm not an expert in this field. I haven't worked with humanitarian for the last 50 years. I've transitioned out to IT and I work as software developer in my full-time job. But I will take you through a living experience of what is to live in a hard-to-reach area. So I will start by that, an example of myself. In 2011, I was living in Somalia, South Somalia, in Gedo. I was a teacher, primary school teacher by then, in the small town I was born in. The problem was 2011 became one of the most damaging droughts in Somalia. It was so difficult that the people needed so much of aid. But the problem was Al-Shabaab has taken over the region. If you know, Al-Shabaab is a terror organization, including the town I was working was controlled by Al-Shabaab. So what happened was that every major humanitarian organization could not come and could not reach. And there was no plan to reach there. So the most difficult thing was that the people living in hard-to-reach areas are the last to get help, are the most volatile, and most probably exposed to the problem, and most probably the last to be reached. And I remember I was lucky, I was working, I was paid for my job. My father and my mother was living, but a lot of people are not that lucky. So what do you have to do? When every major organization says, I have to be 100% sure the money I'm sending doesn't go to Al-Shabaab. I have to be 100% sure my project is not exposed to terror. And it's right, so of course it's a dilemma. But at the same time, the person who is dying in the famine, who needs help at that moment, doesn't, they are not exposed to your reasoning in that sense, and they probably will suffer. What happened was almost anybody who could make it has to move to the only places that was safe enough to provide aid. And that has created a major IDPs, which have created a bigger problem later in 10 years. Now I work. So that in that context, I want to take you through that my experience and what I had from Tabo. So the problem was, it was a security challenge created in the context of Somalia is so complex and multidimensional that there's a security issue because of both political and terror related. There's a logistical issue in the hard-to-reach areas. there is a capacity issue, because if you even have a partner in a small town, how do you train them to the standards we expect? How do you train them to your reporting, to your finance management, to your anything, like even inclusion, every standard we are using? If you cannot reach the person who's your partner, if you cannot direct the content and work together at that time, now probably one of the solutions we are thinking of is technology, but that time is not as today. So that was one of the big major issues. So Tabantabo was formed in 2019. When I came to Norway, I started a program in which I was get a job. I didn't need that, but the same problem come. There was flash floods in the same area I was working. So I was raising money for the nearest families I know. I met a lot of other people who were raising money for their nearest families. But as a personal experience, I know those people were the lucky ones. Those who have people in the diaspora, or those who lived in areas where we can reach. But the person who lives in hard to reach area, who doesn't have anybody in diaspora, or who doesn't have anybody, major organization coming to them, they are exposed and they are most vulnerable. So what I said was, and the problem was that it takes a very long time by just checking all these boxes before we reach the people. Everybody thinks through all the major obstacles before we think about the solution to the people. So Tabantawa, what we did that, we thought about, let's collect the money. We have gone to the families we know, the friends we know, just going everywhere, just doing a meetup like this, collecting money. When we have collected the money, then come the problem. Where do you send that money to? Who is taken to Somalia? The legal challenge in Norway, and the legal challenge in Somalia, the financial challenge. All these things have stopped us. I know the people are suffering. I know what's happening. I am in here, but the context doesn't resonate with the Norwegian system, with the Norwegian financial system. They don't understand. And of course, there is a lot of legal, reasonable problems that are stopping them. So what we said was, we have to think a way that we use the diaspora community hailing from those regions, are directly connected to the people, know the culture, very effective, deep network to crowdsource and send the money there. For us, we are volunteers. I have my 100% job. I just do this on certain weekends and on nights and when I can, when there's a big major problem. But I think like later when we have started, if I just go through the way we have found Tabantawa was in 2019, when we had that challenge. In 2020, we have started the process of registration, an organization that just solves that problem. So we said, okay, I live in Norway. My mother lives in a small town in the hard to reach area. I send money through Hawala system. Then the other disadvantaged person who needs school, who needs water, who needs health, who needs the things that we were crowdsourcing, they can, I know them, I can report them, the good thing with us was, most of us who found were people who educated in Norway, many of them in humanitarian or political or legal aspect of it. So we could understand the context of Norway, the context of the international humanitarian standards, and the context in the hard to reach area. And you have the opportunity to say, I don't want to go into a prison for helping a person. If I wouldn't do that, I wouldn't. Of course, I have my family, I have my things. So we had that balance we could make, and it's not a perfect, but the thing we were able to do that, we were able to connect the diaspora community to the people in hard to reach areas. The people in hard to reach areas find the projects they want. For example, they want a school, they want a center, they want something help with hospital, they want a Caesarean operation or something, some problems. They just bring that problem to us and say, either we are crowdsourcing for this project and you send the money into it, or you can help us crowdsource for us. So the good thing is that the people who are in the diaspora are ready to invest and they are ready to volunteer also. So for us, we didn't find a solution from that aspect in the humanitarian world. It's very much deep focused on local insight, but the ability to get a good network, all the things that we miss from the local area, including networking, including knowing the culture, including when there's a problem, For example, Tamatava is inviting a cultural elders from those areas to Norway. In 2 weeks, like 18th May, we will be electing new board for the organization. We have invited the people who are elders or probably cultural leaders who are in there to Norway to really experience how we raise the money, what are the standards which are set, because that understanding is very important. If they understand that how difficult, how rigorous the process is, then we can reflect that in the local scenario. So Tamatava was able to fund a lot of different projects, especially in health. We focus on hospitals that probably need, we don't build them because we don't have that capacity, and we haven't come to the point where we look for projects. But out of the 4 years experience we have had, we were very much able to create a very much good network within the areas and how to approach them. So also we were also in education. For example, the aspect of education was brought about. A lot of those people who come from that time in 2011 moved to the big towns, have a lot of young children, people who need to go to school or go to university. But if you are a pastoralist lifestyle and your whole lifestyle is destroyed, and you come to town, you're either dependent on a family that you live on, or you go to IDP camp. The schools are not free. So what we were doing that we pay for the teachers and the children go to the school. At least that's the thing we can do. At our capacity, it's very little money. But if you see how much we have done, from 2020, we were only to support one project of 200,000 Norwegian kroner. From 2022, we did 336,000 Norwegian kroner. From 2021, 21 was 278. You see how much it has grown. In 2023, we have collected 1.4 million Norwegian kroner for small projects. And in 2024, we have already beaten 2023. So we are at 1.5 now. So we have grown that fast because the people resonate with it. The locals understand our project, and we are very much able to control exactly how things are done. Because somebody locally I know can report back to me how things are going. I can technology, like we literally get the older people, the mothers, the people who are in the ground to come to a Google meeting every Sunday. Every Sunday we have that meeting, we understand together what we expect from the Norwegian and standard humanitarian perspective and what they expect. And that connection doesn't, I don't know if it exists, but I think it's not very much exploited. Thank you. You can ask questions later. If, other things, I think I can go through this. The projects we have done, but there's a lot more explanation. You can ask me later, more specific.
Thank you very much. We'd like to take a moment and ask if anyone in the audience, we usually wait till the end, but you know, I think it'd be nice to hear if anyone has any questions on some of the themes that you've heard so far before we move forward. Whether it's on the context, whether it's on some of the challenges that have been posed, or any of the work that's been done. Yes, please.
Hi, I just have a general question. Do you have specific recommendations for donors, for clusters, for others, and how to better support localization? Because you've given us, you know, a very powerful account of what it looks like. But I think if you're trying to move change, the best thing is to say, this is what we would like you to do. And that's what I'm sort of trying to see what that would be from you.
You so directed to me?
Well,
General,
yeah, to all panelists.
Do you talk? Okay. I think for me, I have to say that I would love to put more time into this and learn more about, but one of the biggest challenges, for example, from perspective of ours, the financial institutions is so difficult. And a lot of work was not done, especially in the Somali context. That's a big challenge because from how a lot of people wanted to help our concept to be bigger. So we got people from US, other European countries, Denmark, Norway, Finland, who liked our concept, who want to contribute to our projects, but we can't because money coming from outside Norway, we have to go through legal challenge. That's a very big other issue. And the other thing is that my experience in the capacity building locally is very much difficult. So you train one person, they are local partner, then they do the job. Also, they are exposed to all the difficulties around it. Also, capacity building is also very critical, I think, in locally. But for us, from our perspective, we act as locals in exposed outside in here, But the most challenging thing we face is the financial system and how we could. I think I was talking to Jama. Yeah, Mustafa. Like Mustafa was also works in the same concept, but in Somalia. So he crowdsources an organization in Somalia who crowdsources money within there, and they are cracking with some technology. So it was really nice to talk to him. Some of the things as somebody who's interested in data and data science, I'm very much. I think technology can solve a lot of the things, because if you can trace, the way we do now is that if you can trace from the money the person who paid, all the fund process has gone and where it was expected. If you can follow all the line, I think humanitarian organizations and international partners will not have a difficult in accepting a solution around that. And I think we can use technology also for that. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think for me, one of the biggest points is, first of all, trying to flesh out what hard to reach would mean for each scenario, because I think we're hearing different aspects, like Cedric was mentioning more on the logistic aspect of getting aid in and how they've solved that type of problems. For others, it would be clearly security. There's a security problem to moving around certain areas. I think Mahmoud just mentioned the financial bureaucratic aspects. I think there's an element there of moving away or at least being a little bit more clear about what stag means, because in the end of the day, it's a big tag that has different scenarios under it, and also different solutions that would be needed in each one of these different scenarios. So this is one thing. The second thing that I think would respond to more what you said, going back to donors and to the bigger organizations when working in this kind of risk sharing, risk transferring moves on localization. Well, as you said again, capacity building is a big element, but also understanding that flexibility requests on flexibility and adaptativeness, I don't know if that's a word, or adaptivity, doesn't go one way. So this idea that somehow it's a chain of complaints, right? The big organizations complain that the donors request too much and they're too strict and they are not adaptive, etc. And then the big organizations share this complaint down, just imposing a lot of things to the smaller organizations who would then complain that these people. So I think it's rather looking at this thread or this chain of imposed ways of working or methods or restrictions, and making sure that you're not requesting just one end to be adaptive and flexible, but that these needs are being shared across the board. Otherwise, again, you're just like throwing responsibility and asking too much of the local organizations who are actually the less capable of fighting back, because as we were just listening, you know, they are really like the point of this chain where they cannot look up and say, I will not do that. I will not comply to your requirements. And I'm not saying, again, that there shouldn't be requirements or that we shouldn't follow certain procedures, but the idea of being very clear about why they exist, building capacity on how to develop them, this cannot come just as a vertical imposition to whomever is the very bottom of the delivery, but this has to be shared back. So if you have, I'll take again your example of the financial requirements, but that could be also for security or for logistics. If you have a very heavy requirement that will fall on top of that local organization, then from the donor up there, you have to make sure that you have money to build capacity, not just for the delivery. You have to include in the programming, in your funding proposal or your funding, you have to include a clear package to have space, time, people, and funds to work with this local organization and tell them what is expected and how to do that before you even start to do that. So you share a little bit of this flexibility around the chain to make sure that everyone is participating on the final responsibility, that is the delivery. So these would be some thoughts, but maybe Cedric has also other points.
Cedric, we'd love to hear your inputs on this question as well. Any concrete recommendations, and who might you direct them to when you think about some of the challenges that you've expressed? in introducing the work that you're doing with unique support.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Comme le dit Anaï, comme le dit Anna, ça me semble vraiment important de pouvoir renforcer la coordination entre les différents maillons à différents niveaux des bailleurs jusqu'aux populations. Et pour ce faire, il est nécessaire de pouvoir renforcer vraiment les capacités des acteurs humanitaires, sont tous impliqués dans la chaîne de logistique et qui contribuent à la fluidité de cette chaîne logistique.
So it's important to strengthen coordination at all levels of the humanitarian supply chain, from donors all the way to communities, and capacity building for humanitarian actors in that regard is key.
Donc, à ce titre, on travaille à la professionnalisation du secteur, notamment à travers des points de formation, des sessions de formation pour les acteurs locaux et les ONG locales, mais on travaille également au renforcement des capacités des opérateurs locaux de transport. Ça, c'est un point qui est essentiel pour assurer la fluidité, l'adaptation nécessaire aux besoins.
In line with that, HI is working on professionalization for the humanitarian sectors. They do training sessions for local actors, but also they work with actors involved in local transportation on that topic as well.
Donc voilà, globalement, pour favoriser le renforcement de la localisation de l'aide, c'est au-delà des sources de financement, il me paraît vraiment être important comme le disait Anna, de pouvoir prendre aussi en considération la nécessité de renforcement de l'ensemble des acteurs de la chaîne logistique.
Beyond the issues funding, as I was saying, what's key is to strengthen knowledge, capabilities, and resources throughout the whole supply chain, and abilities of human actors to manage the logistics.
Thank you very much. I want to pick up on something you said, and in particular, you said there's a requirement to share the needs. The needs are shared, the responsibilities are shared. And one area I'd like to maybe speak a little bit about is also the concept of the risks shared. And it's in the title here of the panel, but we can conceive of risk, of course, as physical risk when we're thinking about insecurity, but there's also, perhaps when we think about local organizations, issues around reputational risk around engagement or relationships within their communities, even connected to their families. So I guess my question is, how do you think about, first, how do you conceive of the notion of risk in these environments? And how do you think about what does it mean to share risk when sometimes that risk is really primarily on the shoulders of local implementing partners or local NGOs who are working in a given context? I'm not directing it at anyone in particular, but feel free to jump in.
So yeah, the way I understand, of course, risk is something that will vary a lot, as you're saying, but basically you add a new factor of vulnerability to whomever is being affected by that element, by that component, right? The way I see this process in hard to reach areas is that usually these risks are focused very much on what humanitarians have traditionally seen as risk, which are security mainly, so very obvious one, and reputational, as Anna mentioned, and third one, protection. People would normally think of protection risks as being elements too. But then, of course, if we think of a community in their normal functioning ways and thinking that this delivery that will be done through that local community and with that local community, and this might change the dynamics there, you could add a million other risks, right? Including, for example, health risks directly, because you might be managing supplies, for example, that you don't have a lot of training to do. So you could have medical errors as you have in any other place of delivery of medical care. You could have long-term risks, like we just heard also from the Somali experience, that people would actually move to another place to make it easier for this exchange between the humanitarian community and the humanitarian delivery and the community to happen. So you might actually change as far as the place where these people live. And usually this is not accounted for. Usually it's really those three ones. It's security, it's reputation, and if anything, some protection elements that are added to the consideration. So I think that if we're looking into how we can improve also our idea of risk sharing, risk transfer, I think the first thing is to really be empathic and put ourselves in the shoes of that community or that local humanitarian that will be doing that work, and think, how does this person live normally? What is their normal day? And what does the work as a humanitarian or as an implementer of a humanitarian response will change in that? And then you can open a new range of possible risks that you do have to manage if you're asking this person or you're proposing to this person to engage in that work. And again, this comes with a great deal of responsibility, and this is why maybe this would be one of my biggest points of like insisting on this today in this panel. Most of the bigger organizations are very impositive about what they expect from this local organization, and they don't hear a lot on what they can or cannot do, or what they feel that is not a risk to them. So this idea of exchanging and reducing this disbalance between what one type or size of organization can and the other doesn't is very important. And then adapting. Just want to bring one small example and then I'll close. Within Security Insight also, we just finished developing this new handbook on security management for healthcare services in low and middle income countries. And then you might think, but there's a million handbooks on security management for humanitarians, right? Just like in the HNPW, there's, I think, 5 or 6 sessions on risk management for humanitarians. But do local health workers they can access these platforms? No, they can't. A local health worker that was trained as a health worker and that doesn't really know much about the humanitarian sector, they won't just go online to INSO or to UNDSS and then find out that they can have this training on security management to make sure that the new dynamics of conflict around them will be properly addressed. So we need to adjust and adapt. So if you're delivering aid through a local health service and they don't have capacity to manage their security, you're not just going to give them a link to go online and do the UN SAFE, or say, oh, you should take the heat training that costs $5,000 and you have to move to Norway to do it for 2 weeks. You actually develop something that speaks their language, that responds to their needs, and that effectively helps them to do something that you're asking them to do. So that's a little bit where I'm trying to go with this conversation.
Maybe we go to Silik first.
Yeah,
And then,
thanks, Silik.
Silik, would you like to comment on this question of risk?
Les risques se jouent à différents niveaux en Haïti. Le risque sécuritaire, bien entendu, est le principal et le plus bloquant, et ce qui limite les capacités d'accès. Donc,
Yeah, okay. So, so like risks exist at different levels in Haiti. First and foremost, of course, insecurity, because it impedes human access.
donc il y a des risques au niveau éthique, avec les points de payage qui renforcent les gangs. Donc, je parlais de l'augmentation des coûts de transport, mais cette augmentation des coûts de transport se fait aussi par rapport au payage, aux péages qui se font lors des points de contrôle. Nous, à notre niveau, donc, est interdit. D'un point de vue éthique, on ne passe pas par le péage. Donc, on se doit d'être flexible pour pouvoir contourner justement ces points de péage obligatoires.
But there are also risks in terms of like ethics, or in terms of like principles. So he's giving the example of the checkpoints he mentioned earlier, whereby gangs are imposing fees or extracting payments from aid organizations to go anyone who goes through those checkpoints, and that poses some dilemma. It contributes to increasing the cost of transportation for aid actors. In the case of HI, their policy is to not pay those fees or tolls extracted by gangs, but that means that they need to develop like alternative ways of delivering supplies and assistance.
Donc, pour justement pouvoir contourner ces différents points de péage et les zones sous contrôle des gangs, pour renforcer notre flexibilité, on renforce également les partenariats avec les acteurs locaux et avec l'ONG locale Aquadev, que je développerai par après.
So in order to develop those alternative pathways and to sort of like find ways around those checkpoints, they are working with a local actor called Aquadev that we will introduce further.
Et donc, in fine, l'objectif pour nous, c'est vraiment d'avoir un renforcement de la coordination qui joue à différents niveaux. Il y a un cluster accès auquel nous participons, un cluster logistique avec l'ensemble des acteurs humanitaires. Et on renforce aussi, à travers notre approche multimodale, les partenariats au niveau local de façon à être le plus en lien entre les informations à des niveaux des négociations qui peuvent être faites par les acteurs du groupe accès et de les répercuter au quotidien de façon à travailler avec les organisations locales et à contourner les points enfin, les zones de combat entre les différents gangs ou les points de péage qui sont très mouvants et qui peuvent changer du jour au lendemain.
So what they are trying to do is to ensure effective coordination at all levels. So on the one hand, they work with partners of the access and the logistics cluster, for instance, but also with their local partners. And therefore, when negotiations happen between members of the access working group and different armed actors, they can share that information back with their local partners, and reversely, when like the local partners is feeding them information about like new checkpoints that have been established in a new road, and they can feed that back to the cluster in reverse.
Donc voilà, par rapport à ce contexte qui est très instable, très changeant au quotidien, c'est vraiment du jour au lendemain. Il est nécessaire d'être réactif et de faire preuve d'une adaptation constante.
Because the context in Haiti is so unstable, what it means for aid agencies is that they need to be adaptable, flexible on a day-to-day basis to deal with different change in contextual constraints.
Donc voilà, globalement, pour diminuer le risque, nous, à notre niveau, c'est une solution qui marche aujourd'hui, ne va peut-être pas marcher demain, et donc on se doit d'anticiper demain pour trouver des solutions pour les populations.
That's just what they do to manage risk on a day-to-day basis in the current context. It's working now, may not work tomorrow, but that's what they need to do to get at risk and vulnerable communities.
Merci.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Yannick.
Yeah, yes. I started the signal. From my perspective, I've said before, I'm not very much managed big projects and haven't been very much involved with big partners. But my time in Ali, yes, the biggest risk factor was, like I said before, the people did not want to take the risk of the aid going to a terror organization or something like that. So the solution they found out was to take it to bigger cities where they could. It was easier at that time. But there comes another problem. The risk also that we are transferring probably now with smaller, if they are not well trained, if they don't know the expectations, then the reporting back to us will be very difficult. the capacity could also be built. So in somehow, I see that, yeah, there could be a lot of things that could go wrong.
Coming back to the audience, are there any questions that you'd like to ask?
I have a question. So I'm representing the network from Ukraine, and we work with community foundations. And we also have the hard to reach areas, specifically in the military front line. And mainly there's the volunteers from the cities who are decided not to leave the village, or they have their family in there. So so they are the one who are delivering the help. And we got the statistic that with time, it's hard to maintain those volunteers network where they are basically the only ones who are helping. And yeah, we're now in search for solution. The first that came up is to be more respectful toward them, to have meal provided, maybe some additional protection and stuff. But maybe you have in your experience great cases into mainly maintaining the volunteers work and keeping them engaged and satisfied.
Yeah, also we have the same issue. If you are in a conflict zone, you are dependent on someone exposing themselves to a risk to help you do the job. And that's very much a big challenge, because for most of them, they may do out of passion, or they may do out of the small things that may go out of that, but it's a life and death. Especially, so the biggest thing we have found out now is that we use the diaspora people who understand that your case is very different, because the aggression is coming from outside than inside. From our perspective, the aggression is more internal. It may be tribal, it may be political. So if you find the right connection, if you balance, if you create the communication, if you level the space, you may find a solution by using the people in the diaspora who knows those people, who understands the way they think, the process, the mentality, and everything. And that connection helps us a lot in resolving and maintaining some of the vulnerabilities. Our biggest factor is when it comes to terrorism. I can say terrorism also for your perspective from outside that you don't have control and you have no way to engage with. Because if somebody will be killed by getting aid somewhere, that's why we cannot do our volunteer projects in areas controlled by Al-Shabaab. Because first of all, the only time we do those things is if we 100% know it's life and death. When there's floods, when there is drought season, we do small water trucking contributions through volunteers and people who know. We send money direct to them and we know them. But if I were to help build a school in the town, the town I was working from the start, I was telling, they are controlled by Al-Shabaab now. If I raise money to fund that school, they will take contribution and they will get influence. I don't want to be involved in that. So when it's not life and death, when it's not, I cannot go to one person situation, we don't involve it. And it is such a challenge thing. I don't have an answer for that really, sorry. But I understand very much your situation, yeah.
Yeah, so this could be an entire panel on itself, like how we do safeguarding of in this process of doing localization and risk sharing. But two things to flag. One is that typically, and most of you probably know, the safeguarding criteria are very different from bigger organizations to smaller organizations. And we also have this terrible thing within our sector, which is differentiating international staff from resident staff. So we have this whole culture, all of us in the humanitarian sector, of establishing different parameters of safeguarding depending on which group you take part of. So this is something on itself, right? Now, what you mentioned, for example, not providing meals to volunteers is something that sounds so basic, right? But I can imagine that probably when somebody requested funds, for example, for activities that these volunteers will do, these elements sometimes, or often I would say, are missing. So how do you make sure that you include, not just with a per diem approach, which is something that some organizations already cover very well, this idea of sharing some money, but also in good support in kind, really, because the reality is that in many areas, especially those areas more volatile, like front lines and all, it might be too complex for a person to actually take the money and transform that into a meal. So you might prefer to give that in kind. Again, is that one solution? No, you have to see what is the case of your reality. Is it better to give money or is it better to give meal? But you have to go on to that discussion. And again, going back to your question about the donors should not be shocked if they receive a funding proposal or request for funding that includes these types of minimal support to the people who are delivering the activity. Right, so this is one thing, and then on the general aspects of how we engage, especially with volunteers. This is another tradition within the humanitarian sector, that we have a vast workforce that is fairly unregulated, right? Differently from other typical sectors of service in society, where you don't have volunteer people working. The humanitarian sector counts on that. Is that wrong? Not by principle, it's not wrong at all. I mean, it's something that comes with a lot of, I don't know, cultural values also. So I'm not putting that into question, but the point is, the very minimum that we should do is to ensure that some safeguarding processes are also attached to this volunteering population. And in that, I think that the sector has advanced enormously on, for example, issues of abuse, harassment in general, not just gender-based violence, but also against children. Now there's a lot of like safeguarding processes to ensure that people know how to manage children and that is not abusive. You're not under risk of abuses and other types of exploitation. But I think that there are still, especially, and then I'm going to just make one point there, especially on the mental health impact of being a volunteer, this is still underlooked. So of all things that I think we should regulate with our population of volunteers, I would just flag that, and it's not because I'm a psychologist, it's because this is the thing that we hear the most. I was just very recently in a workshop where we were discussing what to do with this big pool of people who resigned from their jobs because they had to handle mortal remains. And so they were part of an emergency response. They were very acknowledgeable of what they were expected to do. But once they got there and they actually had to handle mortal remains, they all resigned. So you see, I think there are some elements on also mental health support and capacity to make sure that these people have a minimum sense of well-being while carrying out some very, very difficult tasks that are often overlooked. So just to flag these issues on safeguarding and inclusion of some basic things, including mental health and well-being support to this population. Thank you.
Cédric, would you like to come in on any of these points that were raised?
Spécialement, je vous laisse la main.
Thank you. We have one more question from the audience, and then I'll pass it to you for a question online. Yes, sir.
I don't know, maybe everything has been partially covered already, but my question would be, at the end of the day, the people that are delivering the aid in the hard-to-reach area are the one taking the risk. So they should be the one managing the risk and therefore managing the intervention logic. If you do a food distribution in the hard-to-reach area, you need to be able to change the where, the how, the when, the where you can distribute if you perceive a risk that you hadn't planned for, right? So my question would be, maybe picking the brain of the panelists on time, would you say that the way we work have changed, inclusive, being more and more inclusive with local actors, especially working in those hard-to-reach areas? And if yes, how are we able to include the local actors in the design of the proposal, design of the budget, in the design of this intervention logic?
And maybe Cédric wants to start on something.
Yes, Cédric, would you
Oui.
like to?
Donc, à notre niveau, on intègre, bon, on travaille avec Aquadev, notre partenaire local qui est spécialisé dans les activités maritimes depuis 2020. Et immédiatement après le séisme de 2021 qui a frappé le sud du pays, en août, on a intégré ce partenaire local dans les activités de renforcement de compétences et on les a intégrés de façon systématique dans la définition des besoins rapport aux propositions qui peuvent être soumises aux bailleurs. Donc, ils sont intégrés dès le début parce qu'ils ont de l'analyse technique et l'expertise des zones dans lesquelles ils travaillent et également des acteurs locaux. Donc, quand je parle d'acteurs locaux, des transporteurs locaux, et on travaille essentiellement avec des petits armateurs sur des canaux en bois. Et donc, voilà, ils sont intégrés dès le début de la
So as you mentioned earlier, HI has been collaborating with a local actor called Aquadev in Haiti, which is specialized in maritime transportation, and they've developed this partnership since 2020. And through this collaboration, what they do now is that they include Aquadev at sort of like all stages of the proposal design, to identify the needs, the objectives of a project proposal. They co-define that with Aquadev. And they do so because Aquadev, as a local partner, has, of course, like contextual expertise, but also technical expertise, and they work with local transporters, so like earlier, but like working on maritime transportation, and that's kind of like they really try to co-define and co-design the project that they submit to donors.
I think that's exactly at the scale we do, because Tamantawa is very much small scale and it's a contribution based now. We don't have a major donors that we manage. But if I can go through the way we do is that the community initiates the process of the project. Then either they contact us or we know about it and we contact them and we say, this one looks good. This is one of the things that we want to support. But what we want we want this sort of reporting. We want this movement of our money and how we are getting back the feedback. And we could be able to train them and have a weekly meeting with them. So they manage the risk for us. They do the job for us. But at the same time, we have the volunteers and the people who are the good time in Norway, who can take on the weekends, on the afternoons, and call a meeting and ask them, how did you do this weekend? What do you want to help you with? Do you want the reporting of the finance and anything what you are doing? It's, just all from the start to the end. But the ownership, the process itself, the management is owned by the people. We don't manage any part of it. We just help them with the funds. At the same time, we follow the process from A to Z. Because one of the requirements for us to continue is that we have to document every penny we send from A to Z. And that's what the major donors, of course, responsibilities. They should be able to take the responsibility of what happened, the money they have done. So first of all, we say these type of projects are the things we are supporting. This is how you should do them. If you need help, we are here for you all the time. We have subcommittees of elders who knows cultures, and we have our board who is young, educated in Europe, who really knows exactly what's required at that level.
Well, on my side, just to finish, and then there are other questions also online. Just to say, I have an optimistic view to things. I think today is much better than it has been before. And I mean, just the fact that we're discussing this and that we had good experience to share, I think it's a good way forward. But my only suggestion would be to really not shy away from these discussions. I know, like, especially working in a sector that everything sounds like an emergency and is. Sometimes we just follow the traditional procedures because we don't have time to discuss things. We don't have time to include everyone that we should have included. We don't have time to listen to all the feedback that we could have listened. So but try to push back whenever you can. If you can write, for example, a funding proposal or funding request that specifies, I need this for capacity building to be able to do a decent process. And then even if the donor says, no, we won't do that, but try to create small spaces, because again, I have an optimistic view to things. I think slowly things are changing. We'll still see a lot of absurds until we get to a better place, but we'll get there.
Okay, so we have a question in the chat from Maeve. She says, I have the impression that the funding gap leads donors to ask for more and more solutions, and often innovative, technology-driven ones, if possible, with a bit of AI, that try and make available and scale up generic solutions that fit all concepts and scenarios. But for hard-to-reach areas that need localized and evolutive solutions, as panelists are mentioning, it is the opposite that is needed. How can you therefore deal with such a conundrum and do more with less?
Okay, I can just mention it. So I'm very much interested in data because I work in data, and I know how solution by technology and IT solutions can improve what we can do, especially like the way now we are restricted by the financial rules, because Somalia is very much restricted on what you can send, and that's our biggest challenge. But if we could crowdsource to a legal bank in Somalia, we could have raised millions, because I could get money from all the diaspora with a project initiated by that. One of the things that we wanted, that how technology can solve, like you need also the manual process, because it's not all, so much easy. But to get the fund itself for the way we work, we could use technology by everybody contributing to the project, creating, using that network, and let the locals initiate, manage, and let us fund from outside reporting, the way you report things, the way the pictures are sent, control, audition, everything can be used to that. So I think it's both ways. So I think it's not, we can't take technology totally out of the local scenario.
So I think my answer is not really satisfying, in the sense that, I mean, if I could answer that, I would be a director into like, but like, the point is, I really think that the point here is that the funding gap, as I think the words that she mentioned, is one element that is hindering the immediate emergency response, right? But then just if we make our horizon a bit bigger, probably, we could also be looking into some other preparedness elements that could be explored, some national capacity building strategies, some constant surveillance and monitoring of the population that lives exactly in these areas that are allegedly then hard to reach. So there might be solutions, and just exploring the room upstairs here today, there's nowadays a lot of these things on geolocalization and some other early action preparedness mechanisms that use technology, just as Martin was saying, to make sure that we can also advance on our capacity to, again, as the participant asked, to do probably more with less resources for the response. Because again, maybe we're talking about the funding gap for the response, but we could find other niched elements of funding also that go through different mechanisms, and that would enable a better response. But I don't think this is yeah, it's not fully responding to the whole needs, of course. Thank you. Cédric, do you have any feedback on this?
Oui, bon, les bailleurs doivent pouvoir intégrer, je pense, la nécessité de répondre aux incertitudes en finançant des activités qui apportent des réponses rapides, mais également de pouvoir se projeter sur le plus long terme, comme vient de le dire Anna, pour la localisation à travers les partenariats locaux doit nous permettre d'être flexibles mais elle ne doit pas être perçue simplement comme une sous-traitance, mais bien comme une plus-value. Pour moi, il est nécessaire que les bailleurs acceptent aussi de financer donc le renforcement des compétences des acteurs locaux, on en a parlé, et les solutions technologiques innovantes ne sont pas toujours celles auxquelles on pense. Et je reviendrai sur l'exemple des pontons flottants. On a été amené à mettre en place des pontons flottants qui nous permettent de se déployer sur l'ensemble des côtes haïtiennes. Et ces pontons flottants sont une initiative, justement, une proposition de notre partenaire Aquadev.
So we made 2 points. Like first one on like donors. Like the point is making that donor needs to understand that localization, the development of partnership, shouldn't be seen and approached through the lens of like subcontracting, but rather seeing the development of partnership as an added value to the humanitarian supply chain, and therefore the donors need to fund capacity building and like funding the development of the partnership itself. On the issue of like technology, he explained that technological solutions are not necessarily like high-tech solutions. He made reference to floating piers that HI has developed with Aquadev in Haiti that enabled them to gain access to the coastline around the country. And that the solution that they've developed to deliver goods and supplies. And that's actually an idea, suggestion that came from Aquadev, the local partners, that they've therefore like integrated in different project proposals.
Thank you, Sarik. Thank you, Yannick. We have about 10 minutes, so if we have a quick question from the audience, very happy to take that. And then, yeah, I saw in the back first, sorry. And then we'll have a closing question and then we'll wrap up. So please.
Question about the donor side of things, which has certainly been addressed a number of times. Are any of you seeing sort of good examples of progress being made on some of these questions around compliance and flexibility? And, you know, talk a lot about that chain of risk that gets passed down and that chain of compliance requirements that gets passed down. And, you know, I often think, no offense to anyone in the room, that we sort of let the top of that chain off the hook a little bit in these conversations. And so I'm just curious if any of you are seeing, you know, what direction are we moving in collectively in terms of the, you know, the source of a lot of those limitations on the flexibility and adaptability that are clearly needed for this kind of work?
Maybe we can take the other questions and we can address
Yeah,
them so that people can ask.
I was sorry, is that me or?
There's you, yes, you in the back, and then the gentleman up.
So mine was a quick question, just because Cedric had talked about the importance of information sharing, especially in areas where there's issues in terms of access by the gangs and so on. No one has mentioned the role that the Access Working Group plays, which, well, at least when I was in Haiti a year ago, it sort of had local NGOs, international NGOs, the UN. It's actually a good example, I thought, of how information sharing was working. It hasn't been mentioned, so I'm just curious as to, and is that actually something that's useful when it's inclusive and includes all the different actors, or is there something else behind it?
I have 2 examples. I don't know if I have time to say it. Okay, so I have 2 examples. The first one is from Somalia operation during the famine last year. It's about how to support local actors delivering in the hard-to-reach areas. I was the head of sub-office, OCHA sub-office in Beidou, so it was the epic center. And after the announcing the scale-up and the corporate emergency and to fight the famine in Beidou, actually we had a big problem, as mentioned by Muhammad, about the big cities become like or the humanitarian actors creating pull factors in the big cities, and people start moving from the countryside or other areas to the big cities, and creating more problems because the infrastructure there was very poor. So the idea was how to support the people in their area of origin using the local actors, local NGOs, and also the local community. So we relied on the tribe leaders, clan leaders, to negotiate access, not to go for sure to the areas far away and high-risk areas, but we said we call it the safe delivery points. We clustered the villages in one village, so they with one village, so peoples from these 7 villages, for example, can come to one village in the middle to receive the ID, to register, to use this, for example, school registration, biometric registration, and also our local NGOs or local partners, they can go to this area. We had to accept some risk. We negotiate the issue with the donors for sure to give us a space to move, and also to somehow deliver with some risk, and also with insurance that we are addressing the cross-cutting issues like protection. So at the end, I think this was a good experience. People start coming to the safe delivery points. Humanitarian actors, they go to this area, they meet there, they receive the ID, they return back. That was facilitated with the tribe leaders. So they guaranteed that these areas will be safe and people can go and come easy. The other example, it's from Syria operation. I'm Syrian and I'm now working in Syria. So supporting local ID delivery after the earthquake last year. Right after the earthquake, a lot of local initiatives from local community and the local NGOs, they collected, start collect the ID to deliver it to the affected area. So the problem was how to reach these areas because it's a different control area. And they need to cross the line between these 2 areas. The issue here is opposite. The clan leaders, the tribe leaders, and the local NGOs, they approached OCHA or humanitarian actors to negotiate on behalf of them to facilitate the access. And it was very fast negotiation because things are moving very fast at that time. And at the end, they delivered this humanitarian, a lot of trucks loaded by humanitarian aid. That was in the first days of the earthquake. And it was had a big, let's say, impact on the support the people in need till the humanitarian actors mobilized to there.
Thank you very much. So to recap the questions, we have the question of are donors being off the hook? And are there any good examples of some of the progress made by donors or with donors on this issue? We have the question of humanitarian access working groups. Are they effective? How are they working? We have example of, if I may, transform your example from Baidoa into a question. How do we work with local leaders, community to facilitate access, and what are the challenges there? So we have a range of potential topics. If anyone would like to respond, Cedric, perhaps I'll give you the floor first. Okay, so
yes.
Give them a moment to maybe settle in. Anyone on the panel would like to respond?
On the context of the role of the cultural leaders, for example, for Tamantaba, what worked for us was the way you said that if it's not Al-Shabaab, which is a terror organization, which is not possible to work with or in any form of, you understand the way they, from your experience, but the major cities, almost the whole country is controlled by some form of either state government or cultural leaders. And the good thing with that is that for us, whenever there's a problem, whenever we're doing project, if anything, we contact them, and we, from the start, we take them into the loop. So they know when the project have started. We take into the conversation session. We either have weekly, if they cannot attend it bi-weekly, at least once in a month, meet with them, clear in our objectives and telling them this is the way we want, this is the process we have, and also them saying their perspective, and they can relay that with some form of authority to the people. So it just makes the whole experience much smoother than if you are just sending somebody, because they know you are in some way the donor, and you have the funds. But if also you give them, for example, as I have mentioned earlier, 18th May we have a election board. We are inviting and actually using a lot of money to clear the visa, get them over here, and bring them to Oslo to our board, because they will experience the way we were collecting money, how we work, what our expectation. We want them to understand from our perspective, from the donor perspective, the whole process and the requirement and the expectation we have, and relay that directly to the people at local. So I think that works smoothly for us at our the thing that we haven't worked is scalability. Because we are not doing this as we do this out of passion, or we don't work in the field. Every one of us in Tamataba have full-time job, so none of us works as part of this job. But it's the thing that we want to scale up to, because the experience has shown that we were very effective. The first people they reach when there's a problem is us, and we can control from A to Z with the flow. Thank you.
I'll go to Cédric if you have any response to any of these questions, and perhaps touching on the humanitarian working group, the access group in Haiti might be of interest.
Alors, au niveau du groupe d'accès, aujourd'hui, c'est très difficile du cluster accès de pouvoir entamer des négociations. La principale problématique, c'est vraiment l'éparpillement des gangs. On dénombre plus de 200 gangs différents dans la capitale. Alors, ils sont au sein d'une même fédération qui s'appelle Vivre Ensemble. Et pour autant, ces gangs ont énormément de difficultés à respecter les consignes des chefs. Donc, on fait face à cette principale problématique.
So we explained that one of the challenges that the Access Working Group in Haiti is dealing with is this, like the sheer number of gangs are like up to 200 gangs operating in Haiti. They are under the umbrella of a wider tradition called Live Together, but it's still 200 groups to deal with, and therefore it makes it very complicated to enter into negotiations with each and every one of those gangs. And the fact is, even though there is an like overarching umbrella organization, the chain of command between them and within all those different groups is very weak, and therefore, like even if you negotiate access with one, that may not sort of like have consequences with the other gangs you may be encountering or dealing with in a particular circumstance.
Donc, au niveau logistique, aujourd'hui, vous comprenez que la capitale de Port-au-Prince est complètement fermée sur elle-même. Et donc, depuis le début du mois de mars, l'aéroport international est également fermé parce que sous contrôle de gang. Donc, aujourd'hui, on travaille à la relocalisation du hub logistique au niveau du Cap haïtien. Et donc, ça fait 2 mois. Et on travaille donc actuellement à renforcer notre approche de province à province pour éviter et contourner la problématique des gangs sur Port-au-Prince. Donc, on est en capacité, à travers la deuxième ville du pays, le Cap haïtien, on est en train de développer justement nos activités de transport pour acheminer les produits du nord du pays vers le sud du pays en contournant la capitale via la mer.
So in terms of logistics, the country, and in particular the capital city, has been closed off since March. The international airport is still shut down, and what that means is that HI and other humanitarian actors are trying to transfer or relocate the logistical hub for the humanitarian response from Port-au-Prince, which is the capital, to Cap Haïti, which is the second largest city in the country, and which is less under the control of different gangs, and that will enable them to bring supplies by sea to that new hub that is being set up.
Thank you. Merci, Cédric. Anna, you have the last word.
Okay.
Of today's conversation.
So very quickly, I'll go backwards. So first on the issue of working with local authorities or local stakeholders, I feel like we have to get much better at trusting people between in these exchanges between organizations, because there's a lot of paternalistic approaches. When sometimes when I hear people talking about the clan leaders or the tribal leaders, and they say with such a paternalistic tone as if this was not like your local federal council is just a tribe leader too, you know, and you don't treat him like that. Why would you treat someone else like that? So I think we sometimes we lack a little bit of cultural competence really to understand that maybe because there's another dynamics of organization and authority and leadership in a different system, it doesn't mean that you have to paternalize them or treat them differently. So building trust is something very important. And also professionalizing these relationships that you were mentioning in terms of negotiation and all, because we also come from this culture that, you know, humanitarian negotiations is a kind of like an old cowboy that sits down at a checkpoint and just like, you know, makes his way through and blah, blah, blah. And it's not really that nowadays anymore. We're talking about huge operations sometimes, you know, we're talking about a lot of constraints and requirements to make sure that these things are done professionally. So you also have to professionalize a little bit these dialogues. And I think so what Mahmoud was saying, that there's a whole effort on capacity building to make sure that all the stakeholders speak the same language and that they understand what are the things at stake in such a humanitarian operation, but also in the ground when we do have, like during the operation directly, when we have to do these things, that these are done in a professional way and not just in kind of like allegedly intuitive or whatever thing, you know, that I think there's this to build trust. We have to make also sure that we're also more professional about the way that we do these exchanges and these negotiations. Now going to the access group, I just want to flag it out. I think Cedric touched upon the Haitian sample more specifically, but I just wanted to flag again that there are several coordination mechanisms that exist in response areas that go beyond the official coordination mechanisms. And I think looking for one solution that would probably respond to all of the problems everywhere, it's not really a good bet, in my humble opinion. It's rather understanding the options that you have to do that type of coordination that you need, and then trying to make it fit for purpose, you know, like what do I need in this area and how can I establish this type of coordination? It can be local negotiation, as you were mentioning, it can be a full-fledged group that discusses access issues and that integrates different stakeholders. It can be something, as I was showing, like the provocation from Brazil directly with the military, why not? You know, and then I'm very unorthodox about this idea of how we approach neutrality as such, but that's another conversation. So I think just we have to acknowledge possible coordination mechanisms, and we have to have very clear what is the possibilities that we can draw from each one of them, make the best out of each one. And just finally on the donors question. So the good experiences, if I can name any, are mainly in the hot topics of the year, you know. So for example, we had one year that was all about mental health. So then all the donors were very glad to receive proposals that included mental health components. And then there was another year that was gender-based violence. So they were all, so I think for me, the challenge in this kind of like optimistic approach that I was trying to say is rather how do we sustain interest from donors in integrating certain aspects of certain advancements as in a sustainable, continuous way of approaching the humanitarian response, because they do have interest. You see, like somehow, if they see that this is something that sounds not just reinforcing the capacity, but also professionalizing the response and all, they have interest. Of course, these flows back and forth a little bit, but we also think that we have a great deal of learning to do as a humanitarian community on how to present these things in a very professional way. So how do you request a certain type of funding? I'm not just talking about filling in the document, you know, but when you pitch the funding, when you talk about it, how do you also make sure that you're presenting it in a very, that your whole proposal is coming forward in a very professional way? And again, not just sounding like you're trying to overblow some response that should have been a small in-kind donation, you know, like how do you actually also present that as a comprehensive, safeguarding, risk sharing, inclusive response, and not just a cosmetic addition to what should have been a minor thing. So I think there's a challenge on both ways there, but I would say that there are some, especially we have to be very attentive to what is catching their attention now, and how can we include that and keep it sustainable and work.
Well, I'd like to thank our panelists, of course, Sidlik Online, thank you very much. Mohammed, and of course, Hannah, thank you very much. And Yannick for your translation, much appreciated. Hannah for your organization, and of course, H2H for organizing this panel and for bringing us all together. I venture to say, given that we have gone over time, thank you so much for your time and for staying on. Our panelists are available if you have further questions that you'd like to discuss with them. Otherwise, we wish you a nice rest of the week.